guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to be doing my March wrap-up. And in a completely unexpected turn of events, I did an obscene amount of reading in March, and I read a grand total of 11 things. That is 2 graphic novels and 9 full novels. I don't know how or when this happened. Honestly, I'm completely baffled, but I'm still very pleased with myself, and I'm very pleased with what I got done, so we have a lot of books to cover, and let's just jump right into this. And hey, why not start off with a controversial one? The first thing I read in the month of March was You by Caroline Kepnes. This book is basically a first-person narrative from the point of view of an obsessed stalker who one day sees this girl come into the bookstore he works at and starts stalking her. And everyone I've ever talked to or have seen talking about this book is completely gaga over it. And I want to straight up say before I get into my reasons, I hated this book. I hated Joe, and not in a, I know I shouldn't like him, but I kind of do anyway way. I hated Joe. I in no way rooted for him at any point in the book. In fact, I was physically repulsed most of the time I was reading. And not even because he was a stalker. I mean, that obviously repulsed me a bit, but that's like the point of the book. He's like legitimately a terrible person beyond that. He thinks so highly of himself. He's such a douchebag of a character and refuses to acknowledge it, and he reminded me way too much of other douchebag men who refuse to acknowledge it. Not to mention the fact that this, I'm just gonna say this because I know a lot of people who watch my channel watch it because they know I talk about queer books a lot. This book does feature a queer character, and I'm legitimately infuriated by how they were treated through the course of this narrative. That is all I will say, because I know people don't want to be spoiled for this. It is a thriller, but you should know going in that there is a queer character and they are not treated well, and I was really, really annoyed by basically everything about the way that character was written. Also, I hated Beck. I think that she's also a terrible person, and I wasn't interested in her at all or motivated to read about her, and only one plot twist could have changed the way I felt about this book, and that plot twist opposite have happened. So I definitely did not like this book at all. I originally gave it a 2.5 stars, but in all honesty, after ranting, I feel like I should lean more towards a 2. Yeah, overall, just not a fan at all. I'm gonna be getting rid of this book because no. Luckily, after You, I did pick up a book I actually really enjoyed, and that was Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book in the Lunar Chronicles series, which is a series of sci-fi retellings, and this one follows a new character, a girl named Scarlet, and is sort of a retelling of Red Riding Hood. I read Cinder in January, and I really liked it, but I found a few of the plot elements predictable, and I actually feel like I ended up enjoying Scarlet more. When I first started it, I did not feel this way because I could not get into Scarlet's character or Wolf, and I really didn't like them, but I felt it had such a strong ending that it made up for the fact that I hadn't loved the first half of it. So definitely really exciting to be able to continue on in the series. I actually really also like the addition of Thorn. I think he could be a very fun character, and I know he's going to have a big role in the third book because I know all the ship names, guys. So definitely a big hit for me, and I gave this second book in the series 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read 2 graphic novels, and I don't have them with me, so I will just put a picture of them up here. I read Rat Queens Volumes 1 and 2. Rat Queens Volume 1 is called Sass and Sorcery, and the second volume is called The Far-Reaching Tentacles of Norigoth, I believe. And both of these are by Kurtis J. Wiebe and Upchurch. I don't know how to summarize these very, very well. Basically, it follows a group of 4 girls who are part of sort of an adventuring company, and they kind of kill fantasy monsters for hire, and it's just a bit of, like, really fun fantasy with a bunch of really foul-mouthed, badass female characters. It's funny, it's weird, it's fantastical, and I actually really liked them. I especially love the character of Betty. I thought she was wonderful, but I liked all 4 of the female characters, and I really liked the world that these graphic novels created. The art's really, really interesting, and I think that the way each of the characters looks is just fantastic in general. My one problem with this book is that the more you read, you're still kind of like, wow, these female characters are so kick-ass and interesting. Oh, wow, they continue to be, you know, kicking ass. Oh, they're still just, okay. And, like, they try to do a job of, developing them, but it still kind of comes across as, they're not as deep of characters as I would like at this point, and this may be because it is a series all about women and it is written all by men. That is my current issue with it. So while I did really enjoy both of these and I thought they were both funny and interesting, I gave each of them 4 out of 5 stars, and I would be interested to continue on in the series, but only if the characters continue to be a little bit more developed. The next book I read, I was so excited to read, and it turned out so well, and I'm so glad. I read Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. Everything Leads to You is a young adult contemporary that I probably should have read a very, very long time ago, but I just finally got to. Basically, it follows a girl named Emmy, and she is just about to graduate high school, but she kind of works on designing the sets for movies, and there's a reason for this. They don't just, like, drop an 18-year-old into this job and they're like, believe it, because we tell you to. There is an explanation for it. But there's also a mystery involved, and she somehow gets pulled into the mystery of this old, like, Clint Eastwood-esque movie star. Basically, it's a mystery, and it's fabulous, and it is also a queer romance, and it was so good. Emmy is a lesbian, and that's like part of the book, but it's not the focus of the book, it's just kind of there, which, I mean, that's kind of what everyone says about this book, but I always feel the need to say it, because that was just so thrilling and wonderful to read about, and it made the romance really wonderful and refreshing, because it wasn't about either of them coming out, it was just about romance, and the romance was amazing. And this book was amazing. The way it talked about Emmy's upbringing, honestly, the way it talked about privilege was really, really interesting, and overall, everything about this book was perfect to me. I am almost completely sure it will be on my list of top fave books of 2016 because I loved it, and obviously I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I'm not going to talk about this next book too much because I just read it for school, and that is The Woman Who Did, and this is by Grant Allen. I read this for my English Lit class. Basically, this follows a woman in 19th century England, and she is determined to never get married, but she would still like to have relationships, and she believes she's going to kind of change the way that women have been treated in society, and I didn't like it at all. I thought it was weird, I thought it was slow moving, I didn't really like the ending. We discussed different interpretations of the ending, but I still didn't really like it, and unfortunately I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm also not going to talk too much about because I did a full spoiler-free video review for it, and that is The Dragon's Blade, The Reborn King by Michael R. Miller. This is high fantasy. It was sent to me by the author, but I actually really, really enjoyed it. It is fun, it is interesting, it has some really great characters, and it could be the start of a fantastic series. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars overall, but you can go and watch my review for more of my thoughts. Next up, The Wheelman by Duane Swierczinsky. And this is a very quick book, by the way, and it basically follows this guy, and he is a mute getaway driver. He's been the getaway driver for a lot of heists, and somehow he's gotten involved in the wrong heist. Things turn south very, very quickly, and he has to try to, like, damage control, and people keep getting kidnapped, and he almost keeps getting killed, and he has to kind of work his way out of these situations. Overall, it was a really exciting ride, and for most of it, I was like, this is exactly what I was in the mood for. This is like a solid 4-star read, which is what I wanted. It's thrilling. The characters, like, they're all really fast-talking, except, you know, the main character, because he's mute. But they're fast-talking, you get like 800 characters because they're also all in with the mob, and that was great, but unfortunately the ending really, really disappointed me, and it did not go the way I wanted it to, so despite the fact that I thought this was going to be a 4-star book through the whole book, the very last couple of pages dropped it down to a 3.5. Still a fun ride, but a disappointing ending. Next, I read a couple of books from NetGalley this month. It was my first couple of galleys, which was very exciting, and the first one that I read was Saving Montgomery Sold by Mariko Tamaki. I don't want to go into my whole rant about this book, so I will leave a link to my Goodreads review of it down below and you can go read it. Basically, this book follows a girl named Montgomery Sold, and she goes to school in this small town in California, and she doesn't like anyone she goes to school with besides her 2 best friends, and they're part of this, like, mystery club, and they kind of talk about the unsolvable mysteries, like ESP and superpowers and stuff like that. And then she also has to deal with some of the discrimination that comes her way because her best friend Thomas is gay, and also Montgomery has 2 moms. And I read this book because I was expecting, you know, a very interesting queer narrative, and while it did have a really strong ending that kind of pulled it back around for me, for most of the book, it felt like I was reading about how discrimination towards gay people is more harmful to the straight people in their lives, and that was not a good time for me. Montgomery constantly, like, gets upset because like, Thomas will be made fun of, and she'll get angry that he's not more upset. And she'll be like, aren't you hurt? You should be more hurt. And she'd tell him how he should react to being discriminated against for being gay. Also, this book had a blaring lack of communication ever, and her moms were great, but they never talked to Montgomery ever, and that was infuriating. I will say that this book had a really solid ending, and I think it did a very good job of talking about religion alongside queer issues, which isn't something that I've ever seen in a YA book, especially. It just handled it in a really different way, and so it took me from really disliking this book to kind of forgiving it for some of its faults, because I think it did a good job of addressing the things that Montgomery had been doing wrong for the whole book, along with talking about religion in an interesting and refreshing way. So overall, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. And in case you were interested, this book comes out April 19th. The other book I read from NetGalley was Keep Me Posted by Lisa Beazley. I just kind of happened upon this book and requested it because it sounded interesting, mostly because it was a narrative about sisters who live very far apart and want to stay in communication, and that is something that sounded very interesting to me as someone who has a little sister who happens to live on the other side of the country. Basically, the plot of this book is that Cassie is our lead character and she's our narrator, and her sister Sid lives in Singapore and Cassie lives in New York City, and they meet up on Christmas and decide that for the new year they are going to write handwritten letters to one another throughout the entire year to get to know one another again because they haven't been close in a long time. And I'm not gonna say what the rest of the description of the book said for reasons. Basically, the description of this book, it says all of that, and then it adds a huge other part, which does not happen until 60% through the book. And I think once you're 60% through a book, that's the kind of stuff that shouldn't be on the flap anymore. If you're curious, you can go read the description of this book, but yeah. Overall, my main issue with this book was that, again, for a book about communication, it had so little communication, and I was infuriated at Cassie for most of the book because every one of her problems could have been more easily resolved if she'd sat down with any other person in her life and said, no, I'm sorry, I know that we're both busy, but I need you to listen to me for 5 minutes. If that had happened at any point, every single one of her problems would have been easier. There should have been more communication, because my favorite thing about the book was the relationship between the two sisters, and there weren't nearly enough letters. I would have loved to read a lot more letters and understand their relationship better, because I feel like, considering that was the concept of the book, it was a little bare bones. But because I love the relationship between the sisters so much, and because it had a pretty good ending, although it was a bit idealistic, I liked the way it wrapped up, and I liked the way that Cassie developed at the end of the book. So for all of that, I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And hey, if you're interested in picking it up, it comes out April 5th. And the final book that I read in the month of March was a collection of short stories, and it was an actual new release. I pre-ordered a new release, and I read it the month it came out, which is like a miracle. But the book that I pre-ordered and read was A Tyranny of Petticoats, and this is a short story collection edited together by Jessica Spotswood, and Jessica Spotswood also wrote a short story in here. Basically, this book is a collection of 15 short stories. They are all historical fiction, and each of them centers around a female character. And when I heard about this book last year, I really wanted to get my hands on it, but actually what happened for a lot of these was that the authors tried to cram too much in 20 pages, because each of these stories is about 20 pages long. And that was really frustrating because I was given these worlds and glimpses into these worlds, and they weren't able to be fully realized within the time that they were given. And I think that that's honestly something that the authors could have handled better. If you know that you only have 20 pages to explain a world, maybe your world can't be both historical fiction and fantasy, because that is a lot of world building and character development to get done in so little time. So that was my main problem with this book, is that it actually had a weird number of stories that were fantasy and magical realism, and I think that a couple would have been nice, but the number there were, it was like way too many, and it made them not work as well. So my 2 favorite stories were Pearls by Beth Revis and The Legendary Garrett Girls by Y.S. Lee, I believe. I think that those were both kind of Old West stories, and I really enjoyed them, and they featured female characters I really liked. This book also does have two queer stories, and those are City of Angels by Lindsay Smith and The Whole World is Watching by Robin Talley, if you're curious and you want to go look into those. So overall, I liked this book, but I think it could have been significantly stronger, and I think that it suffered from too many weak stories alongside some of the stronger ones, because I also really loved El Destinos and City of Angels. Those are my other two favorites. Because I felt like they didn't try to take on too much in too little amount of time. I think that they told the story they needed to tell, and that's why those worked. So yeah, overall, when I averaged out all my ratings, because I did give a rating for each story individually, I got 3.8, but I decided to round down to a 3.5 because I don't think I was passionate enough about this collection to give it a 4 stars, to be honest. Okay guys, there you go. Those are all the books that I read in March. I read 11 things, which is insane, and it would be great if April could continue like that, because this is my TBR, and it's gone way too crazy for me. I don't like having books beyond one stack as a TBR, and now they're up over there too, so that's concerning. So hopefully I'll be able to get through as many books in April as I did in March. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite book was that you read this month, and any of your thoughts about the books that I read this month. I know I am in the minority on you, and if you want to fight me on it, that's fine, but I've had a month to really truly decide on my feelings, and I just no. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!